John?
Looking forward to that, Sandra. Meantime, longtime Democrat power players now sounding the alarm about the rise of socialist candidates within their own party, including former Obama chief of staff Bill Daley, who warns socialists are leading Democrats into the, quote, Tea Party trap. Ben Domenech is with me now, a Fox News contributor. Ben, good to be with you, and condolences on Lindsey Graham's passing. I know he was a very close friend to your family.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So the former Commerce Secretary to Bill Clinton, the former Chief of Staff to Barack Obama, Bill Daley, said the following: extremist candidates make it harder for a party to win and make a victory perilous for the country. Some Main Street Democrats are beginning to speak out, but more must be vocal. Socialists with outlandish fringe platforms and no loyalty to the party are threatening to snatch control, much as the Tea Party movement waylaid the GOP more than a decade ago. Big difference, though. I mean, the Tea Party were sort of traditional conservatives.
Yes, and I think that
socialists are not Democrats.
That's the key line that's in there is no loyalty to the Democratic Party. If you look back at the Tea Party experience, I think that, you know, in hindsight, we can view it as a corrective, a necessary corrective, from my perspective, for a Republican Party that people felt did not care about fiscal issues enough and was not listening to their own voters. Tea Party members were overwhelmingly Republican voters. Mm-hmm. They wanted the party to shift in a direction, and they achieved that. And guess what happened? They got absorbed into the Republican Party. Some of the Tea Party candidates, Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, you know, all these guys who are still around here in Washington, having an enormous, effect on policy. And that's because they did have that loyalty overall to the coalition. They did not want to be something separate. Socialists, on the other hand, they want to fundamentally change and take over the Democratic Party. They do not want to return to some old guard version of Democratic policies. They're not trying to go back to the Obama years. They're not trying to go back to the Clinton years. They're not trying to go back to the Carter years, except in the outcome, perhaps, for our economy. And so that's a situation that I think is a huge problem for Democrats, and it's going to be a problem, I think, in November for them.
I mean, they're certainly not going back to the Clinton years, because compared to where we are today with the Democratic Party, he looks more like a Republican.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely the truth. I actually have, we have interns now at the Daily Wire, where I'm the opinion editor, who are the children of the early aughts. They are all, born after 9/11. And so I'm giving them educational experiences. And, one of them, I won't say which one, leaned into me the other day and said, I learned this thing. Bill Clinton was really smart and charming. And I was like, yes, he was. He was a, he
maybe a little too charming.
A little too charming, yes.
So James Carville is ripping establishment Democrats for letting the DSA get as far as it has. Listen to what he said here.
It's the Democrats' fault. It's the corporate Democrats. It's all because the Democrats listen to Al Gore, some like that. These people are so stupid, I don't know what to say about it.
He's basically saying the Democratic Party is the architect of its own destiny.
Yes, he understands, I think, that this is a poison pill. It's not going to be something that can be sold to the American people. Carville was so good at his job because he understood how to sell Democratic policies on a national level. He viewed their campaign as a national campaign. Socialists are running against Democrats in key blue districts where if they win the primary, they've effectively won the election. And they're going to use that when they come to Washington to exercise outlandish degrees of power because they feel safe. They're in safe seats. They can't be challenged as easily as other figures could if they were coming from the types of places that represented the country more. And I think it's going to fundamentally change the Democratic Party when they come into that coalition.
Right. Well, and they're definitely going to change the Democratic agenda. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
The co-chair of the New York City DSA said, look, we're serious about winning, which is why they're running in Democrat districts, because they want to run as Democrats. Also said, we're serious about governing. But here's the vision. Watch here.
And that means creating allyships, creating partnerships, building coalition with people who are excited about the type of economic populism that we put forward, and building allies like perhaps Governor Newsom, if he's interested in things like universal health care, reduced cost child care, affordable housing.
Not to mention things like getting rid of the Senate, getting rid of the Supreme Court, getting rid of the presidency. But here's the thing. Newsom is kind of like warming to the DSA. But the problem with these movements is eventually there will be a purity test. And all of the establishment Democrats will fail the purity test.
Yes, they will. And as much as I think Gavin Newsom is dipping his toes into this. He understands they're a key part of the coalition. He understands the activist energy that they bring into this coalition. They will turn on him at a moment's notice when he breaks with them, which he's going to have to do if he has any hopes of ever being the president of the United States.
Yep, they like to eat their own.
Yes, the leopard will never eat my face.
Thanks, Ben. Great to see you again.
Good to be with
Condolences on Liz.
Thank you.
Please, my best to your wife.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.